As we approach the year 2025, in today's edition of Finance.Swiss, we are going to discuss the outlook for economies and financial markets in 2025. What role will the ongoing armed conflicts play? Can investors finally forget about inflation? I'm going to discuss these questions here in Zurich at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology with Professor Jan Egbert Sturm. He's the director of KOF Swiss Economic Institute. It specializes on the analysis of the development of business cycles. Professor Jan Egbert Sturm, thank you very much for receiving us here at your institute. For the last 3 years, probably there has been one big topic in economic discussions globally: inflation. Will inflation keep its significance in 2025?
Well, the inflation rate have been coming down, luckily. So in that sense, it will become less important to focus upon that. But nevertheless, I don't think it will completely disappear. Many people are still confronted with the fact that price levels today are very different as how they were, let's say, for instance, before the pandemic, and really observe these much higher price levels. So that will be in the minds of many and will therefore, at least to some extent, remain a topic.
Let's talk about inflation in Switzerland. The Swiss National Bank has lowered its forecast to 0.6% in 2025. They seem to be more concerned about inflation being too low rather than being too high in 2025. Do you share this concern?
Yes, we've also in our forecast reduced our inflation forecast for next year. It's currently at 0.7%, so very close to also what the Swiss National Bank thinks. And indeed, this lowering of the inflation forecast is showing that the signs are more towards the other direction, namely lower inflation rates than actually higher inflation rates. And with 0.6 or 0.7%, we are a little bit below what is more or less the target of the Swiss National Bank.
What are the consequences of the relatively low Swiss inflation figures for the financial market, for investors in Switzerland?
Well, I think this always basically lower inflation rate in Switzerland as compared to our neighboring country is a sign of the stability of the Swiss economy. The Swiss franc is a very stable, strong currency, which is reflected with low inflation dynamics. So even during the last couple of years in which inflation rates peaked at 8 to 10% in the surrounding economies, in Switzerland it never reached that level. It was at most 3.5%.
We have still several armed conflicts ongoing. What is their influence on the outlook for financial markets in 2025?
Yes, it creates uncertainty in the economy because these armed conflicts are very difficult to predict as of how long they will proceed, what will be the ultimate consequences. So that is creating, simply said, uncertainty, and uncertainty is poison for the economy, so to speak, because it withholds people to do actions into the future. So that is indeed something which we do worry about.
At the beginning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, energy shortages have been at the center of economic discussions. During the pandemic, there were supply chain disruptions. Will these still be topics in 2025?
Well, not to the same extent, because these particular topics you mentioned are really closely related to either the pandemic or the Ukraine war. It doesn't mean we won't be concerned about energy, but more for structural reasons. We know we have to decarbonize our economies. We have to reduce CO2 emissions, and there energy plays a crucial role. Other more longer-term topics which we really are focusing on nowadays are demographic changes, in particular in the Western economies. We know the societies are aging. What will that imply for our economies? And a third very important longer-term topics is digitalization or artificial intelligence. What are the consequences of that, and how do we deal with that?
Let's conclude with 2 incomplete sentences, which I'd like to ask you to complete. One day, when looking back at 2025 in a couple of years, 2025 will be labeled as the year in which...
Well, I hope it will be the year in which these larger nations actually put themselves together again around the talking table and actually coordinate actions to improve world economic conditions.
If I were the economic director of the world in 2025, I would decide...
Well, I would indeed decide that conflict is not necessarily the best way forward. We really have to talk to each other because, for instance, the environmental problems we can't solve as an individual country. We must solve this as a world united.
Professor Jan Egbert Sturm, thank you very much for talking to us.
You're welcome.